Look at her face. She has finally realized her perfect day is ruined. If I were you, I would cancel the wedding and hide inside this room. You think the dress is the biggest thing that will be destroyed today? You're wrong. The person who should be crying today is not me.
I thought my life was perfect until that morning. The scream that woke me was not mine. It came from my cousin Sandra, who had gone into the room where my wedding dress was hanging. The room I had locked with my own hands the night before. The room I had pressed my forehead against before sleeping because I was so full of joy I did not know what else to do with myself. But the scream was not a scream of horror. It broke too quickly into laughter. I heard it from my bed. I heard the way it started high and sharp, then collapsed into giggling, the kind of laughter women share when they have done something wicked and feel no shame about it. I heard Sandra's voice first, then my other cousin Vivian's voice climbing on top of it, and I lay there in the early morning silence, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above my head. Something cold moved through my chest. I had grown up with these girls. We had shared the same grandmother's compound, eating from the same pot during Christmas, plaited each other's hair on Sunday afternoons. Sandra was 3 years older than me. Vivian was my age. And from the time I was old enough to understand envy, I understood that they carried it for me the way some people carry a sickness, quietly for a long time, until one day it bursts open and destroys everything it touches. I got up slowly. My wrapper was still around my waist from the night before. The compound outside was already alive with noise, neighbors calling greetings across fences, the sound of water running, the smell of firewood and onions rising from the kitchen where my mother's friends had gathered since 5 in the morning to cook for the wedding guests. My wedding guests. Today was supposed to be the most beautiful day of my life. I had dreamed of it since I was a small girl, drawing wedding dresses in the back of my school notebook. I had saved for 3 years, 3 years of cutting expenses, skipping enjoyment, saying no to things I wanted, all so I could buy the dress I deserved. Not borrowed, not rented, mine. I walked down the short hallway to the room. The door was open. I stopped at the doorframe and looked inside. The dress was on the floor, not hanging where I had left it, not folded carefully on the chair, on the floor, torn, shredded at the skirt, the delicate lace ripped like someone had grabbed it with 2 hands and pulled in opposite directions. And across the white fabric, spreading like a wound, was a deep purple stain. Dye. Someone had poured dye across my wedding dress. Sandra and Vivian were standing to the side. They did not run when they saw me. They did not even pretend to be sorry. Sandra had a small smile on her face, the kind of smile that had been waiting years to arrive. Vivian looked at the floor, but not out of guilt, out of the effort it was taking her not to laugh again. I looked at my dress. I looked at them. And then I did something that confused them completely. I said nothing. I turned around, walked back to my room, and closed the door quietly behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed. My hands were in my lap. The noise from outside continued. The laughter of women cooking, the sound of a generator starting up somewhere down the street, a child crying and being comforted. I did not cry. Not because I was not in pain. I was. That dress had cost me 14 months of savings. I had stood in that shop for 2 hours choosing it. I had tried it on 3 times. I had hung it on my wall for 6 weeks just to look at it before the wedding. I did not cry because something else was sitting in my chest that morning, something heavier than grief, something I had discovered 4 days ago that had not finished destroying me from the inside. But we will get to that. I need to take you back 4 days before the wedding. Back to a Tuesday evening when I was sitting in Victor's apartment, waiting for him to return from work. Victor was the man I was going to marry. Tall, well-spoken, the kind of man who opened doors and remembered your mother's birthday. We had been together for 4 years. 4 years of building something I believed in. 4 years of arguments and reconciliations and late-night conversations, and the slow, comfortable trust that grows between 2 people who have decided to choose each other. Or so I thought. His phone rang while he was in the bathroom. I was not the type to check a man's phone. I want to be clear about that. I had never done it in 4 years. But the phone rang 3 times in a row, and when I glanced over to see if I should call out to him, I saw the name on the screen. Melissa, my love. I froze. The phone stopped ringing. Then it rang again immediately. Melissa, my love. I sat there and watched it ring, and something in my stomach turned over slowly, like a pot being stirred. Victor came out of the bathroom. He picked up the phone without looking at me, walked back toward the window, and said in a low voice, "I'll call you back." He hung up and turned around, and I was looking at him. "Who is Melissa?" I asked. He did not flinch. That was the thing that told me everything. A man with nothing to hide would have paused. He would have looked confused. Victor looked at me and said, "My colleague. Why?" with the smoothness of someone who had answered that question in his head many times already. I let it go that night, but I did not sleep. The next morning, while Victor was in the shower, I opened his phone. I am not proud of it, but I needed to know. And what I found in those messages, what I read in the back and forth between Victor and this woman called Melissa, did not just break my heart. It rearranged something inside me permanently. They had been together for over a year. The messages went back 14 months, which meant it had started 8 months into our engagement. But it was not just the betrayal of another woman, it was what they were planning. Victor had told Melissa that he was going to go through with the wedding because his family expected it and calling it off would cause trouble. But 3 weeks after the wedding, he was going to tell me the marriage was a mistake. He was going to claim we were incompatible. He was going to leave me, a new wife, publicly humiliated, and move in with Melissa, who was already looking at apartments for the two of them. He had a plan, a whole quiet plan, and I was the last to know. I put the phone down exactly as I had found it. I went into the bathroom and turned the shower on cold and stood under it with my clothes still on because I needed something outside of me to match what was happening inside. I screamed once into the water, just once. Then I turned the shower off, changed my clothes, and walked out of that apartment. I had 4 days to decide what to do. And when I walked back to my room that wedding morning, past the torn dress, past Sandra's satisfied smile, past the noise of a celebration being prepared for a marriage that was built on a lie, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. The dress being destroyed was not a tragedy. It was confirmation. It was the universe telling me, "Bridget, finish what you started." If you are watching this, and you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, stay with me, because this story is for you. And if you have not subscribed to this channel yet, do it now, because the stories we tell here will find you exactly when you need them. Now, back to that morning. After I closed my bedroom door and sat in the silence, I did not panic. I want you to understand how strange that was. My wedding dress was destroyed on the floor of the next room. My cousins who had done it were standing in that room, waiting, I realized later, for me to come apart. They expected me to run screaming into the compound. They expected tears, begging, the kind of public breakdown that would give them a story to tell for years. We saw Bridget on her wedding morning, crying on the floor, calling off the wedding because her dress was ruined. That was the scene they had written for me. I did not give it to them. Instead, I opened my box under the bed and I took out an envelope. Inside that envelope were screenshots, 17 of them. Every message I needed, Victor's words to Melissa, Melissa's words back to Victor, the dates, the plans, the future they had mapped out together, while I was home saving money for a wedding dress and believing I was loved. I had printed them at the business center 3 streets away on Wednesday morning, while Victor thought I was at the market. I counted them again. All 17 were there. Then I got dressed. Not in a wedding dress. That was gone. I put on a white blouse I had owned for 2 years, simple and clean, and a long fitted skirt the color of cream. I tied my head wrap carefully in the mirror. I put on my mother's gold earrings that she had given me the night before as a gift. I applied my makeup slowly, not the heavy bridal makeup that had been planned, just enough to show my face clearly without hiding anything. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. The woman looking back at me was not the broken woman Sandra and Vivian had tried to create. She was not the humiliated bride. She was not the woman Victor had planned to discard like something used and no longer needed. She was someone who knew the truth, and she was about to share it. I heard a knock at my door. It was my mother. "Bridget," she said, and her voice was full of the kind of pain that mothers carry for their children. She had seen the dress. "My daughter, talk to me. What do you want to do?" I opened the door and I looked at her face. The worry in her eyes, the way she was holding her wrapper tight with both hands, the way she did when she was frightened. I held her hand and I said, "Mama, do not cancel anything. Let every guest take their seat. Tell them the bride is coming." She looked at me for a long moment, reading my face the way only a mother can. Whatever she saw there made her nod slowly. She squeezed my hand and walked back toward the compound without asking another question. I picked up my envelope and followed her out. Outside, the compound was full. Neighbors, family, friends, dressed in their best, eating small plates of food, laughing, taking photographs. The tent had been arranged beautifully. The chairs were filled. The MC was testing his microphone. Victor was standing at the front in his suit, smiling at someone, his hands clasped in front of him, looking like a man who had everything under control. He did not see me arrive. Sandra and Vivian were standing near the gate, watching me walk out of the house. When they saw that I was calm, when they saw that I was dressed and walking with my back straight and my head held, the smiles left their faces completely. Sandra stepped forward and said quietly, "Bridget, the dress." "I know about the dress," I said, without stopping. I kept walking, and the whole compound was about to hear what I knew. I walked to the front of that tent like I owned every inch of ground beneath my feet. The MC saw me coming and reached for his microphone, ready to announce the bride. I raised one hand and he stopped. Something in my face told him this was not the moment for music. The guests began to notice. The conversations dropped off in waves. First the people near the front, then the middle, then the back, until the whole tent was quiet and every face was turned toward me. I could hear the sound of a neighbor's radio 2 compounds away. I could hear my own heartbeat. Victor turned around. When he saw me, not in the dress, not in the full bridal state he had expected, just me in my white blouse and cream skirt with an envelope in my hand, something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, not yet, just confusion. The confusion of a man whose plan has just changed shape without his permission. "Bridget," he said, and he even smiled, the smooth, easy smile. "You look—" "Victor," I said, and I said his name with such quietness that it cut the air like a blade. I turned to face the guests. I knew these people. I had grown up around many of them. My aunties in their fine lace, my father's friends, Victor's family who had traveled from far, the women who had cooked all morning, the children sitting on the edges of chairs with their good clothes on. I said, "I am sorry to do this in front of all of you. I know you came here with joy, and I respect that, but I cannot stand in front of God and these witnesses and enter a marriage that was already a lie before it started." The murmuring began. Victor stepped forward. "What are you doing?" he said, and his voice had changed, lower now, with an edge in it. "Bridget, this is not the place." I said, "You chose this place. You chose to plan a wedding you never intended to honor. You chose to invite these people to watch you perform. So this is exactly the place." I opened the envelope. I held up the first page and I read from it, not all of it, just enough. Victor's own words to Melissa, the plan to go through with the wedding to satisfy his family, the plan to leave 3 weeks after, the apartment they had been looking at together, the message where he told her she will never see it coming. She trusts me too much. She trusts me too much. I let those words land in the silence. A woman in the 3rd row, Victor's aunt, a woman who had always been kind to me, covered her mouth with her hand. Victor's face had gone completely still. The smooth smile was gone. He was looking at the papers in my hand with the expression of a man watching a wall fall toward him. "Those are private," he started. "They were private right up until you decided to use my life as a performance." I placed the printed pages on the table in front of me, the table that had been set up for the signing of documents for the formal part of the ceremony. I placed them there, the way you place something you are finished with. Then I looked at Victor one last time. I had loved this man, I want you to know that. I had loved him in the way that cost something. The kind of love where you rearrange your life around another person, where you plan your future with their face in it, where you believe completely in something that turns out to be half true. Looking at him now, I felt the last thread of that love leave me quietly, not with anger, just with a finality that felt like a door closing in a house you are never going back to. I said, I release you, and I release myself. I picked up my envelope, what was left of it, and I turned and walked away from that altar. And the tent erupted.
What happened next, I did not see with my own eyes. I was walking away. But those who were there have told me the story so many times that I can see it as clearly as if I had watched it myself. Victor stood at the front of that tent for a long moment, completely alone, while the noise rose around him. His groomsmen looked at each other and did not know where to stand. His mother, a proud woman who had always spoken of her son like he was made of gold, sat in the front row with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes down. She did not defend him, not one word. Because what is there to say when the evidence is sitting on the table for everyone to see? His uncle, the eldest man in his family who had stood up earlier to speak about the honor of marriage, stood up again. But this time he said nothing. He simply picked up his cap from the chair, placed it on his head and walked out. When the eldest man leaves, the celebration is over. Everyone understood that. Then Victor's phone rang. In the silence that had fallen over the tent, it rang loudly. Someone near him said the name that appeared on the screen before Victor could grab it. Melissa. The name traveled through the tent in a whisper that moved like fire through dry grass. Melissa. That is the name, Melissa. Victor silenced the phone, and that was the moment his last wall came down. Because silencing it was the same as confirming everything. An innocent man answers. An innocent man says, "Who is Melissa? Let me show you who she is." Victor silenced the phone and stared at the ground. A woman near the bag stood up and started packing her bag. Then another. Then 3 more. The tent began to empty not in a rush, but in that quiet, dignified way that Africans leave a place when they had witnessed something that shames them. Not running, just removing themselves, taking their children's hands, straightening their wrappers and going. Sandra and Vivian, my cousins, were standing near the entrance of the tent. I am told that as the guests began to leave, people started to understand the full story, that the wedding dress had been destroyed, that these 2 women had done it, that they had stood and watched and said nothing while their cousin faced this morning alone. A woman who knew our family turned to Sandra and said, loud enough for others to hear, "You destroyed her dress and you could not even warn her about this man. What kind of family are you?" Sandra had nothing to say. Because here is what my cousins had not understood when they crept into that room the night before with their dye and their scissors. They had thought they were hurting me. They had thought they were taking something from me. But a dress is just fabric. It can be replaced or not replaced, and life continues. What they had actually done, without knowing it, without intending it, was remove the last distraction. If I had woken up that morning and found my dress whole and beautiful and perfect, some part of me might have hesitated. Some part of me might have stood at that altar and told myself to wait, to see, to give him a chance to explain. The dress being destroyed had burned every bridge behind me. It had left me with nothing to do but walk forward. They had meant to break me. They had accidentally freed me. By the time the tent was nearly empty, Victor had already left. He did not make a speech. He did not chase after me. He simply disappeared, the way people disappear when the story they built about themselves has just been told correctly in public for the first time. The food that had been cooked since 5 in the morning sat on the tables. The flowers my mother had arranged the day before were still beautiful. And I was in the back room of my family's house, sitting quietly with my mother beside me and my father's hand on my shoulder. And none of us were saying anything because sometimes the people who love you most understand that silence is the kindest thing. But the story was not finished yet. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, I learned things that only come to you after the storm has moved on and you are standing in the quiet it leaves behind. I learned that pain and peace can exist in the same chest at the same time, that you can grieve something, a love, a future, a version of your life you had planned carefully, and still feel underneath the grief a clean and solid thing that will not break. I had that solid thing. I held on to it in the mornings when I woke up and the weight of what had happened pressed down on me before I was fully awake. I held on to it when people called to ask how I was, their voices carrying that particular mixture of sympathy and curiosity that follows public events. I held on to it every time I passed the room where the dress had been destroyed and remembered the sound of that laughter. I did not regret walking away, not once. What happened to Victor, I did not arrange it and I did not celebrate it, but I will tell you what I was told. Melissa, the woman he had been planning his future with, ended things with him within 2 weeks of the wedding that never happened. She had been willing to be the secret. She had not been willing to be the scandal. When Victor's name became the story people told at parties, the man whose wedding collapsed publicly because of his own messages, she removed herself quietly. Victor was left with no wife, no secret woman, and a reputation that had been redefined in one morning. His family, I heard, did not speak to him easily for a long time. His mother, the proud woman, had sat in that front row. She had watched. She understood what her silence meant and she gave it. Sandra and Vivian came to my mother's house 2 weeks after the wedding. They did not come together. They came on separate days, which told me they were no longer as close as they had been when they were doing wrong together. Sandra sat in our parlor with her hands folded and said she was sorry. She was crying. I looked at her and I thought about all the years, the shared grandmother's kitchen, the Sunday afternoons, the envy she had carried for me like a quiet companion since we were children. I said, Sandra, you tried to humiliate me and you failed. Not because your plan did not work. You destroyed the dress. That part worked. You failed because you do not have the power to determine what that morning meant. I decided what it meant, and what it meant was that I was saved. She cried harder. I did not harden my heart completely. She was my blood, and that means something. But I was honest. I told her that forgiveness and closeness are different things. I could forgive her and still choose distance. I would need time to know which I was choosing. She nodded and left. My dress, or what was left of it, I did not throw away. I folded what remained of it and I put it in a box, not because I was holding on to pain, because I wanted to remember what survived that morning. The lace was destroyed, the skirt was stained, but the bodice, the piece I had spent the most time choosing, the part with the delicate embroidery along the neckline, was still whole, still clean, still exactly what it had been when I first brought it home. Some things survive everything. I found out 6 months later that a colleague of mine was getting married and had no budget for a proper dress. I gave her the whole box, the destroyed parts and the whole parts, and she and her tailor worked with what was there. She sent me a photograph on her wedding morning. She was glowing in a dress that had been rebuilt from ruin, wearing it like it had been made for her. I kept that photograph. It reminded me of the lesson that morning had carried all along, the lesson I want to leave with you now, because this is what I need you to take from this story. What was built to destroy you can become the foundation of something they never imagined for you. My cousins chose a dress to destroy because they thought a dress was the thing. They did not understand that the thing, the real thing, was never the fabric. It was the woman wearing it, and that woman was never in their hands. Victor chose to underestimate me because I loved him quietly and he mistook my quietness for weakness. He did not understand that a woman who saves for 3 years and builds her own life piece by piece and asks no one to carry her weight is not a woman that breaks easily. I walked out of that tent with my dignity. I walked out of that relationship with my truth. And I walked into the rest of my life with something better than a wedding. I walked in knowing exactly who I am and exactly what I will not accept. The morning everything broke was the morning I was built again, properly from the inside, and no one held the hammer but me. If this story moved something in you, if you know what it feels like to be underestimated, betrayed, or written off by people who should have protected you, then you are exactly who this channel was made for. Subscribe, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.